Great. I'm really excited that we're doing a NICEC seminar on green guidance. I'm going to hope to be there, but I thought I'd record it just in case so that it's there, even if I get caught up with my travel that I'm doing today. So I think it's a really interesting topic. And I think the ideas that we've got on this subject are sort of gradually growing and developing. We've got a lot of interesting stuff that we're starting to put on the Career Guidance and Social Justice website. But I think it's also worth noting that we don't really have robust theories in this area in the way that we might do in many other areas. So in this presentation, I'm going to try and offer some thoughts about how we can take this forward and really think about practice primarily. So how can we actually make this real? So climate change is the defining issue of our times. It's something that's going to affect all of our lives, is already affecting all of our lives. And, we don't need to rehearse the science here, but there's very strong scientific evidence that demonstrates that climate change is happening. And so we've really got to move past this idea that this is a kind of contentious or debatable subject, really. So what does this mean? Well, I think we can say that for many people, the shift that we're seeing in the climate is going to lead to changes in their lives. So rising prices, shortages of goods, growing inequality, health issues, increasing volumes of migration, and so on. And we've heard a lot about all of these things in the recent political environment. But critically for us in careers, it's going to lead to shifts in the skills needed, the jobs available, and the nature of those jobs. And that's something that we all need to think about. So one thing I think it's important to say is climate change is an important environmental issue. Maybe it's the most important, but it's not the only one. And we also need to think about our environment more broadly. So the environment is where we live, is where we conduct our lives and work, our careers, and it's shaped by numerous small decisions made by each of us. Should we throw rubbish out of our window, for example, but also by policies and politics. So what kind of level of street cleaning does the local authority provide? These are environmental questions just as much as the climate change issues are. And I think it's also important to remember that while we might feel that we're all in it together, and certainly there's a lot of slogans and so on that talk about everybody being on the same planet and all of that sort of thing, there are also important differences in the way that this manifests for different countries and different social groups. And this picture from Sao Paulo in Brazil gives us perhaps the most stark example of this, that we can have one group of people living in a kind of nice green environment, and just over the wall, effectively, that separates them from the poorer people, they're living kind of in complete squalor and so on. Our environments are social environments, and they're affected by these wider social and political issues. So when we're thinking about this, we've also got to recognize that this is a political issue, and it's one which is affected by power and by influence. And what we've seen over the last 50 years is a lot of corporate players in this area, particularly people in the fossil fuels industry, exerting a lot of influence over how societies address these issues of environmental change and sustainability. And that's something that I think poses a big challenge for us as we start to think about the role that we might play in terms of how we might work with employers on this. And one of the things that we like to do in careers is to work closely with employers, but we also need to recognize that there are some tensions and challenges on doing this. One of the big influences that corporate players in the environmental discussion have had is trying to develop ideas like the individual footprint, the carbon footprint, these sorts of ideas. These are very individualistic ways of seeing the problem. So the responsibility is all placed on the individual to reduce their waste, to recycle more, to use their car less, and so on. Now, I'm not saying there's no place for this. In fact, I think it can be an important part of it. But what is very clear now is a focus on individuals making different consumer choices is insufficient. And I'm going to argue today that this is also something that we can think about in terms of the way we think about individuals making career choices as well. Where does this all lead us then? Well, what we are starting to see is the emergence of Green New Deal type initiatives in various different countries. This is a political approach led by government, which foregrounds systemic issues, but also foregrounds the politics of production. How can we organize work and the economy differently in order to reduce climate change? And this, I think, re-engages us with ideas around work and career, because it's about where we work and how we work rather than just how we consume that's being discussed. So if we accept the idea that career is about how we relate to the world around us, to the institutions, to the environment and so on, then this places career in quite a central role. And it also means that we're talking about something much bigger than just green jobs. So we're not just talking about how do we think about what might be an environmentally sustainable job to work in and then trying to direct people towards that. We're thinking about how people's working lives interface with all of these issues that I've been talking about so far in terms of how we might shift the economy from one kind of economy which is unsustainable to a different one which is sustainable. And in people's careers, this raises quite a lot of important questions. So people need to think about moral questions. So what kind of work should they do? Do they understand the environmental implications of it and so on? But also their skills. Have they got the skills to be able to make this positive contribution into the environment? So how do career development professionals then address these issues? I think one of the things that we are keen on telling people is they have agency, they have the capacity to change their life. But when we're faced with something like the environmental crisis, this can be very challenging. So in other work, I've proposed, along with Ronald Sultana and Rhea Thompson, I've proposed this idea of the 5 signposts for a socially just career guidance: build critical consciousness, name oppression, question what's normal, encourage people to work together, work at a range of levels. So what I've done here is to try and rethink, well, what does that look like if we're thinking about this in the context of the environment? And it's about things like helping people to understand what might happen in the environment, what it might mean for their careers and the careers of others. It's about helping to see climate injustice and noticing where it's shaping our careers. It's about questioning ideas about normality and what constitutes normal life, and recognizing the fact that normal life is probably going to change. It's about helping people to see the limits of individual action, and then also as a professional to be able to work at multiple levels. So what might this sort of approach, this kind of green glasses approach to career guidance look like in the context? I'm going to talk about schools. That's the world I sort of feel most familiar with. So let's think about what that might look like. And the first thing we need to recognize is that this is not news to many young people. Lots of young people are already engaging with these issues. We can't really talk meaningfully about careers in schools without recognizing that there are lots of young people who care about this already. So how can we bring this in a meaningful way into the classroom or into a careers interview? Well, we developed the CDI framework and as a new way of setting out essentially a careers curriculum in schools. And what we've tried to do is to broaden the kinds of concerns that the careers curriculum can deal with. So it includes things like work-life balance and bigger political issues. Within that, we've got a particular highlighting of discussing the relationship between career and the environment. So we've got that in as a competency, if you like, within this set of learning outcomes that we've developed. I think we can actually think much bigger about this. So if we think about how we use the curriculum to address environmental issues in career, we might, in this grow throughout life, we might be reflecting on people's impact on the environment, challenging them to do more and challenging climate change. We might be exploring possibilities and thinking about environmental policies and the impact on occupations and sectors and so on. Think about how we might manage career differently, perhaps considering different climate change scenarios and how that might impact on your career and your career management. You might think about how environmental activists, NGOs, and sustainable businesses got started, how they're resourced and operated, in that this kind of entrepreneurial competency around creating opportunities. You might look at balancing life and work and how this relates to different environmental impacts. You might discuss things like the 4-day week there, for example. And let's see the big picture and think about these interactions between climate change, the environment, policies and politics, and so on. So what might this look like in practice? Well, in practice, we might have something like this. We might give students, divide students into small groups, give them a series of sectors to look at, and get them to do some labour market information research. So get them to look at key companies, typical jobs, and think about how this sector impacts on the climate and how climate change will impact on this sector. So I've sort of played around with that, given some resources and so on. But I think that's a reasonable exercise that most students would be able to do in, say, Key Stage 4, and would be able to do a bit of research and come up with some ideas. And then we need to unpack that in a follow-up discussion where we perhaps talk about some issues around how climate change is changing business. Are businesses doing enough? Is it impacting on the jobs that are likely to be available? Where can you work if you want to be green? What does it even mean to be green? And what can you do if you work for a polluting company? So I've got some resources here for you to look at if you're interested in some of this stuff. And my contact details, I've already given the Career Guidance for Social Justice one as well. But to summarise, I think climate change and wider environmental issues are becoming increasingly important for our careers. It's not meaningful to talk to people about their careers without recognising the changing context of environmental change. A critical approach linked to a wider considerations of social justice provides us, I think, with the best framework for considering these issues as part of career management. And career education provides us an important space in which we can get individuals thinking about environmental change. And hopefully I've just given you a few ideas about how that might work out in practice. So I hope some of this has been interesting. I hope it's been gives you a few ideas, and I hope we can carry on talking about them in the seminar. Thank you.